Hey Nick, what's going on?
What's going on? How we doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's always good to see you. Thanks for taking a little time to join me on the podcast here. So we've never done this before. We've talked a lot, but we've never talked on camera. So
Yeah.
hopefully this works out, as well as it usually does when we're behind the scenes. Um, First question I have for you is, what's your biggest challenge as a dietitian working with young athletes?
I mean it's consistency. As our job as dietitians is to educate and kind of give them the structure to address some holes in their diet, their performance
Mhm.
plan, their recovery, right? You know, we can give a high school level player every tool in the world. You know, when to eat it, what to eat, what are some substitutes, but the buy-in, the the foods in the fridge. These kids aren't food shopping. These kids aren't
Mhm.
kind of packing their bags all the time. It's how do we get it to where it's the easiest way every day to be repeatable? And it takes buy-in from the parents. It takes buy-in from the kids. Sometimes it takes buy-ins from the siblings. Like there's a lot of stress put on some of these high-level guys or girls, and we need to just make sure that whatever we're doing is as easy and as repeatable as possible.
Okay. Yeah, and that's very consistent, like with what I see. So, like, what are some of the things that you do as a dietitian to sort of build those systems on top of the educational piece?
So, how everything starts with us is we usually start with an hour initial meeting. During that initial meeting, we kind of break it into two halves. The first half, the first 30 minutes, is we go through the foundations of nutrition, macronutrients, micronutrients, hydration, timelines, and how to build your plate. You know, we're going to give this kid a lot of information, a lot of resources. But if they don't understand why we're giving the recommendations, it doesn't usually follow through.
Hmm.
So we have to give them a little bit of education on day one. And then that second half is where we kind of address what their day to day looks like, how much they're traveling, what's their sleep schedule, what's their travel team look like, how intense are their practices, how long is their bus ride, when do they have lunch. We talk through every little thing so when we put a plan together for them, we can know exactly where they are and what they can have equipped for that moment or that meal. Um, Once we move on from that plan, then we kind of go into our weekly meetings. Our weekly meetings consist of adjusting that plan. Those are usually 30-minute follow ups. First 15 minutes, we go into, hey, how was your week? Were our goals met? How did the tasks go? Is there anything we need to switch?
Hmm.
The next 15 minutes is we usually cover a new education topic a little bit more in depth. So when they're going through our program, I want to make sure that they're as educated as possible within the nutrition field. We might only see some of these kids for a few months. We want them to leave with the structure and the education. So long after they hang up their cleats, that they know how to eat, and they know how to structure their day around food.
Okay. All right. So, what are some of the ways you explain to them why? What I mean by that is like sort of what would be some of the reasons why you would tell them this is a good idea to eat the way that I'm kind of describing to you? Like, what are the
Okay.
outcomes? Like, how do you sort of get them to buy into that why?
So every kid, every parent, every family comes to me with some sort of goal.
Hmm.
It could be weight gain, it could be weight loss, it could be a performance goal. A lot of guys are coming now. I want to throw harder, I want to lift more,
Sure.
I want to be faster. So letting them understand that what we put into our body impacts how much muscle we put on, how we recover. You know, Fluids handle a lot of our flexibility, our cognition. You know, if we're not properly fueled, we can't perform, at the top level. And we need to make sure that every day they step on the field, they're at 100% of their capabilities. And the biggest uphill fight we have is a lot of these kids under fuel. And if they're under fueling every day, they're leaving a lot of performance on the table. That it could be a 5, 10% of what they could have got. Over a month, over a year, that's a lot of development we're leaving on the table. You
Hmm.
know, and we usually hammer that in those first few weeks together. So They understand why they have to work in that extra snack, why they have to work in that extra meal, why they have to hydrate in the morning when they wake up, or why they have to pack stuff for school that
Hmm.
other kids don't. Young athletes need to eat a lot more than their peers, and sometimes they don't want to, and it's kind of explaining to them, well, you came to me with goal A, this is how we reach goal A. Goal B, we could talk about it another day and what kind of path we could take to that objective as well.
Okay. So how much experimentation is there in your process? So what I mean by that is trying one new food
Oh yeah,
or trying like, hey, I want you to eat at these times throughout the day. Do it for one day and let's see if there's a difference, right? Almost like an A/B test,
right,
right? Like how much of there is it? And like I want to say coercion, right? But because I do this a lot in my work, was like,
yeah,
go try this one thing and see if it makes a difference. And when they come back to me and say, yes, I did that one thing you asked me to do, it made a difference. Now I'm willing to do it again, or I'm willing to do
right,
the next thing because I have proof versus, hey, just go do all these things. And now
yeah,
it seems overwhelming. Like how much experimentation is there in your process?
a lot. I would say that every plan there is like levels to what we need accomplished. There is, hey, this needs to happen, this should happen, and let's try this. Like that's kind of how when we're writing up these plans is how we attack it.
Mhm.
You'll talk to kids and they'll be like, I won't eat anything green. I hate vegetables. This is all the foods that I will never eat, and sometimes you got to give to get, so in the
Yeah.
beginning we steer clear, and then we'll start slowly kind of trying to push in some additional habits. I don't like to push so hard in the beginning because, we want to establish some trust. And like you said, they have to see some difference,
Mhm.
so my normal process, and like every kid's different, but like I like to hammer down the school day first.
Okay.
It is basically 8 hours where they have the same structure every day. So most kids now pack lunch, right? I like for them to include two additional snacks. I usually do a high protein snack in the morning before lunch and a high carb snack after lunch, so they're usually fueled up before they go out to practice. If they're not bringing fluids to school, bring some sort of fluid. Like that's usually what I hammer down first, right? And then once that's kind of established is how do we win the after school meal, or how do we win the after school pre-practice snack? And then we start moving towards the end of the day. Because normally when they get home, most of the families that come to us, like their parents are already implementing some structure because, if they got into me, they know that it has to be something that they're putting value into. So lunch and dinner when they're home are usually solid. But when the kids are alone and making their own decisions, that's where it can kind of steer in the wrong direction. So that's usually the first place we start.
Okay. Yeah. And listen, anytime somebody, and this is true of all of us as human beings, forget about what age we are, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes we're skeptical of trying a new thing if we don't know how it's going to help us, even if somebody who's really smart tells us
Yeah.
that's the thing. If you do this, you're going to get that result, right? So there's a lot of, you didn't say this, but I'll say it because I think we both know this through our conversations and our work. There's a lot of relationship building in that,
Yeah.
right? So talk
Yep.
about the relationship side of what you do in terms of getting to know these kids, like getting them to buy into the idea that you're not only a smart guy who's going to
Yeah.
help them with their food, but that you really genuinely care about them so that they can achieve their goals.
And it's always the parents that are like super super pushy in the beginning of like wanting those results, and like when I talk to them and I try to give them that buffer of, hey, listen, the first few weeks we're talking, we can't be putting value into the scale, the metrics.
Mhm.
We need to establish some rapport, because I will
Gotcha.
be the first kid cheering for your son or daughter as they win their competition and get their first hit, but they need to understand that I am not the food police. I am not somebody that's going to reprimand them for not doing the wrong thing.
Right.
I am like an educator, a counselor, somebody that they can lean on, when they're struggling. I'm not the guy that's going to say, hey, you didn't do this today, go run laps. I'm not, you didn't get your shakedown today. You know, we need to do X, Y, Z tomorrow to make up for it. There are days where I have like my higher level guys where I'll be a little bit more stern or, like, what are we doing here? What's the point? But in those first few weeks, I think of myself as a buffer sometimes between the kids and the parents.
Yeah.
And like a lot of our intro meetings happens full family. I'll be sitting with mom, dad, the child, and maybe a sibling or two. We talk about the structure of the house, the foods in the house, building out the scenario for success. And usually I'm playing mediator.
100%. Like I was just going to say that, like in my work, like I'll build in parent family check-in meetings, and I've
Yeah,
been in meetings where it's either the parents and the athlete who are not seeing eye to eye, or
yeah,
sometimes it's the parents who are just there not seeing eye to eye. Mom and dad
yeah,
disagree, right?
yeah,
But I think ultimately what you said there is important, right? Like the athlete has to have some autonomy in the process,
yes,
right? In order to be motivated. If they feel like they're being forced to do something and you're just another adult in the process forcing them to do the thing that their parent wants them to do or their coach wants them to do, they're going to tune you out too, right?
yeah,
So being that buffer is really important to be like, hey, like I get it. I understand. I'm not going to beat you over the head with this. I'm going to be a little bit more gentle and understanding because I want you to be the one who sees the
yeah.
difference and buys into it and feels like you have a sense of control over the process versus feeling like I'm just somebody else telling you what to do. So like I guess I'll go back to what you just said there. Like if you're being that buffer and the parents want you to be something else, how do you handle that situation?
I pick and choose who I work with, and it's,
Okay.
I there are times where I've had to explain to the parents that they're bringing me in to do what I do, not what they want to do. And I'm going to get their
Mhm.
kid to a healthy point, to get them educated. And, sometimes it takes a little bit for them to build up trust too. Like the parents need to trust me as much as the kids,
Sure.
and I try to give them that full explanation in the beginning of my process and like what it takes to kind of get into the point where I'm a part of their table, and like I know me and you have talked about this
Yes.
extensively is how do you build your child's table? It's going to be their sports coach. It could be their strength conditioning coach, their mental performance coach. Now they're introducing a registered dietitian. Everybody is talking at this table, right? Everybody is telling the parents and the kids what they think is the most important. You know, and I've told you before is everybody has their time and place to have that lead role. And by the time they come to me, I need to have that lead role for a few weeks. They need to give me some autonomy in what's going on. And I mean, of course, we're
Right.
cluing in on every decision. Everything that's going like through is run through them. There's not something I would recommend to their kid that's not approving, but I am going to give them my truest opinion on where they're at and what I think should happen.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm not going to get a recommendation from a parent that they want to do. And if I don't feel that it's the right thing, I am not going to recommend it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's consistent with the kinds of things that I say. And listen, the thing that I was thinking about when you were giving that answer, because it's very similar. My situation is very similar where parents will come to me with a perceived challenge that they
Yeah.
perceive. One, it doesn't always match the perception of the athlete in terms of what their challenges are,
Hmm.
right? And then it's gosh, I lost my train of thought, right? Like, but then it's like oh my god, I'm gonna have to edit this out because like I completely got stumped there, right? But like that perception of like, hey, this is what I think should be, right? Oh, this is what I was gonna say is sometimes parents get really emotional, right? I don't know if
Yep.
you get this, right? You'll get an email or a text message from a parent who's like panicked or freaking out about something that's happening in their kids' lives.
Yeah.
And then you'll never hear from them again, right? Because they just wanted somebody to be a
Yeah.
sounding board, right? They want to go to you and be like, Johnny or Mary didn't have their shake today. And
Yeah.
maybe there's something going on in their life or the kid's life that's actually driving that, but they're saying it's the nutrition piece that they're like panicked about. And then you never hear about it again. They just come, they dump it on you,
Yeah.
right? You feel like I gotta help fix this, and then you never hear from them about it again. So like, I guess I'm sort of speaking out loud here, but do you get that? Do you get people who kind of lean on you in that way emotionally, or
Yeah.
sometimes it's not even about the nutrition, it's about other things, or like they get really like sort of focused in on one thing and then you never hear about it again?
I get more text messages at 2 in the morning from parents than maybe I don't know how my life ended up like this, but I do, and like some of my favorite text messages are Johnny, who was supposed to drink 100 ounces of water today and he only got 70, like, you know, and Johnny put on 1 pound this week. What are we doing? And I'm like, well, he did these 10 other things, or, we were traveling this week, kind of like making them feel like they accomplished it. It's not always going to happen in one time. And a lot of the goals, like I know we were talking about when they come to me in the beginning, is sometimes I'll bring a ninth grader who's, let's say, 5'10", and he's 120 pounds. And I'll
Mhm.
be like, what is your goal? And they'll be like, 210, you know? And like, I'm like, all right, well, let's talk about like a 3 month goal, and then they'll be like 190, and they just have no understanding of what the structure is supposed to look like. And
Right.
that's
What's
not their fault.
realistic?
That's not their fault. No, it's just the education behind it. Um, when you can get to the point where the parents are the cheerleaders, the support staff, and everything else is just making sure the food's in the cupboards, making sure the stuff is ordered, and kind of making sure the kids are always the products that they need or the food that they need are always around, and then the kids are making the decisions on when and why.
Mhm.
That's when we know we've had success. And that's when you can kind of reach out to the parents and just say, hey, listen, like everything that we've kind of worked towards is going to happen now because they're doing it. It's going to be 2 to 3 pounds a week for the next 10 weeks. I can tell you right now, I can hang up the phone. It's good. It's done. They understand. And that's when the parents will hit me with some of those. He got sick. Like he broke his hand. Like does it change? Does all these things come into play? And they might have an issue they want to just voice and put out there. And I'm happy to be that person. Like it gives me more insight about the relationship that
Yes.
we have. It gives me more insight on if they're stressing about this, that means we're pretty good on that front. Like it gives me a better insight of
Yes.
what's going on. So I like to be that person.
And again, analogously, I think it's very similar, right? Like having those insights
Yeah.
and being able to sort of take that in is really helpful in terms of managing the relationship with the athlete to understand. Because like one of the things that when you were kind of giving your answer, I was thinking to myself, like we when I say we,
Yeah.
us adults generally tend to focus on the negative, right? Like
Yeah.
what are the deficiencies? What aren't you doing? Versus, hey, what are all the good things they're doing? What's all the progress that they've made? Maybe it hasn't been perfect, but they've come a long way, right? They've come from this to this. Did they follow the blueprint to a T exactly? No. But if we can look at where they started to where they're at now and the behaviors they've adopted and
Yeah.
the change in their mindset or their change in their appearance or their change in their performance or whatever, just the way they feel about themselves, right? Let's focus on that, right? Like
Yeah.
let's focus on the
It,
strengths, focus on the good things because that's going to give the athlete more fuel to keep going and be like, hey, I feel really good about myself. Yeah, I didn't get it perfect, but I'm going in the right
it's
direction.
it, it's not a pass fail. It's an
Right.
investment.
Yeah.
Like it's something that's going to take a lot of time to kind of show success. It's not an A, it's not an F, it's an investment, and it's going to take a
Hmm.
lot of time to kind of show value. But if you keep putting a few cents in here and there every day, when you look up in a year, it's going to be a lot of money. And that's kind of what we try to get across. And for parents, it's a lot easier to see sometimes. The kids it's very hard for them to see long term.
Hmm.
But it,
Yeah.
it's tough, but it does take a little bit.
Yeah. But being able to help them stay patient
Yep.
and reinforcing the good
It's
things that
good.
they've done
Yeah.
so that they want to keep going and they don't they don't quit, right?
Yeah.
And this is going to be maybe a little bit of a question out of left field, but this is really a genuine curiosity because I can tell you have these skills. Is when you're going through your training as a dietitian, is there a counseling element?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could see the counseling skills training coming out, right? Like that, the things that you're talking about are not just about having knowledge, they're about being able to sort of counsel people through these situations, like which
Yeah.
I have that training as well. So I think it's really
Yeah.
important. But I think it's important for people to know that about somebody like you and you specifically, like how important being that counselor is important in the
Yeah.
process of success.
Yeah, and I usually give this kind of conversation of what's the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian. A dietitian is a medically protected title like an MD or an MP. We went through school in all walks of chemistry, bio, and we're trained to kind of handle how to impact your body around disease states with food, how to handle medications with certain foods. We go through a good piece of counseling as well, whether it's motivational counseling, whether it's handling somebody going through a tough time and trying to get that education piece across. My specialty is sports. This is what the lane I chose to go into, but those counseling techniques, I would say, are 10x the power than the education behind nutrition. I tell people all the time, nutrition is not rocket science for some of these kids, but it's just getting them to get behind it and do it. Like I said before, it's just consistency, and I think that the education behind it leads to consistency.
Yeah. So again, I've been sort of taking this tack, but I do try to do this for people who are listening is like what you're describing is very, very similar to what I experienced as a mental performance coach, which is to say there's a lot of really smart mental performance coaches, and most of us all learn the same things,
Yeah.
right? We're taught the same skills. We're taught about self-talk. We're taught about imagery. We're taught about goal setting. We're taught about all this stuff, motivational theories. But the ability to understand people, specifically young people who are very
Yeah.
different in a developmental sense. They think differently, they learn differently, and being able to connect with them is usually the biggest indicator of success, right? They buy into you, you understand them. I had a girl last night that I work with who's a freshman athlete in high school, and she said, my mom, she's really trying to help me and she's really nice, but she doesn't understand sports. She doesn't understand why I'm so competitive,
Yeah.
right? That genuine disconnection and understanding is often the difference between success and failure
Yeah.
because you want to be seen. I have so many athletes who tell me, I just want to be myself. I
Yeah.
don't feel like I can be myself. Right. So, like that ability to let them be seen and to find those things in themselves and show up in the world that way
Yeah.
is important. I would imagine that's the same as with nutrition, right? Like
Yeah.
being a dietitian, like, hey, let's find the thing that works for you, but it also works scientifically. But it doesn't have to be what I tell you to be. We can find a process. We can find a food. We can find a way that works for you. So with that, you're achieving your goals, but it's done in a way that is, that it's supported by evidence.
Yeah, we talk about this like it takes time. I was cracking a
Mhm.
joke earlier before we started about some kids will come to me and give me a laundry list of foods they won't eat. They won't touch the color green. Like, and of course we need to include a good amount of vegetables. Of course we have to include different types of foods that are whole foods. But sometimes in the beginning it's, hey, like what do you like to eat? Like let's eat more of that. Like let's find
Yes.
more stuff that you feel comfortable with. What's your pregame routine? Okay, like let's just increase it a little bit. Let's pull it back a little bit. And then as we start to kind of build on and find some successes, yeah, then we'll introduce the quote unquote healthier options. Finding that fiber, finding those vegetables. You know, that's a big part of what I do here too. It's not for the bottom line of performance, but it's to give that over-encompassing education piece on they should be able to make these decisions for their whole life.
Yep. Yeah. So we haven't talked about this yet, but like, can you talk about your background as an athlete, as a
Yeah.
college baseball player, and how that influenced what you do now?
Oh yeah. So I grew up on Long Island. I played baseball at West Islip High School. I had the opportunity to get a nice scholarship to play as a catcher at Mercy College. I went to Mercy, loved my time there. Um, First game ever in college. went for a fly ball behind a home plate, cleat got caught, snapped my ankle. Basically tore everything in my ankle besides my Achilles. So I spent that year in the rehab room going through the process of what led me here, what kind of rehab it looked like, and started to really fall in love with the process. Like I love the PT guys, the AT guys, and I was thinking like, all right, at the time I was studying cybersecurity and finance, wanted to do something big and bad in the city. That was kind of my aspirations. And that year my coach was let go, so at the end of the year, didn't know if I wanted to go back, wanted to transfer. One of my buddies was playing at Queens. He kind of pressured me to come over there. So I transferred to Queens. Had to switch my major because they didn't have what I wanted. So I picked some finance econ thing that I wasn't in love with. Started playing ball again. Had a pretty decent fall. Was feeling really, really powerful. Like feeling good at the plate. Feeling like I was getting my footing back. Week before the season, tore my labrum. So now I'm back in the rehab room. Now I'm at a new team. It was kind of uncomfortable transferring in division at the time. It was a little weird, as the NCAA, the rules were a little wonky around it. So just because my coach left, it gave me the opportunity. That coach at Queens went to bat for me with the NCAA, and now I'm hurt. So that kind of made it a little weird for me. Spent a lot more time in the PT room and started working. Like now I had to start getting a job, start doing other things. My cousins at the time had a supplement store. I started working at the supplement store, and one day a lady walked in and told me she was a dietitian. I had no idea what a dietitian was.
Right.
Legitimately no clue. Never heard of one before, thought it was a fancy way to say nutritionist, and started asking her about what she did. And she told me that she helped people in the hospital that couldn't feed themselves. She was helping put tube feeds in, TPNs, and I was interested in it, and I was interested in a way that I can have my own practice, take insurance, and like go through all that realms. Um, Switched my major, finished up Queens. Was right about when COVID was going happening, so I basically graduated my last semester online. Um, Started trying to figure out how I wanted to tie it into sports. So I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn looking at dietitians. Hey, where did they study? What were they doing? How did they get to where they were? Florida State became a clear number one spot for me. I had a really good chance to go down there. I got accepted, got into their DI program, and had the opportunity to work with a lot of their sports teams when I was down there. Football team, beach volleyball, soccer. I was able to see a bunch of different sports and starting to like hone in my craft. While I was down in Florida State, I took an internship with Eric Cressy at his facility in Florida. So I had the chance to kind of study the strength and conditioning side at CSP. And I went in there not trying to come out as a strength coach, but kind of how to learn to talk to strength coaches. What I'm saying needs to line up with what they're doing in the gym. And I wanted to figure out their terminology, their wording, and the thought behind their program structure. And it really gave me a good opportunity to do that. Going through, like I spoke about earlier, is becoming a dietitian, you have to do clinical hours and rotations. So like I said, I did half my time in a hospital, and then I had an opportunity to kind of pick a place where I could specialize. I was able, through Florida State, to kind of get an access to the Toronto Blue Jays. So I spent spring training there with the Blue Jays, kind of working on the minor league side, and interning with them, studying under their RDs, and kind of seeing the ins and outs at the highest level, from some of the major league guys to the minor league guys, and the education and kind of the role an RD plays in pro sports. And I basically finished that up, came home, took my test to get credentialed, and I started working with a couple of my buddies who had some gyms on Long Island, just doing nutrition packages, pairing it on, working with some baseball orgs, and decided to open up a practice. My practice nowadays is basically split half and half between adults handling GLP-1s, handling medical nutrition therapy, handling
Mhm.
peptides, hormones, and then the other side where I kind of run is the performance side, running the youth athletes, professional athletes. I have kids from 8 years old to professional athletes, and we really focus on the education piece. Like I've been trying to just keep advocating is you can give a kid a plan, you can give a kid a PDF, you can give a kid a 12-week process, but is that going to help them long term? And I think that's what's been our separation factor is that. And the accountability aspect of the RD, or we always pair on an additional coach to kind of check in on them day to day from their app or from texting, kind of really build that in and out relationship of
Mhm.
somebody's always with you to support you. And we've had a lot of success with that. And thankfully, we've just continued to grow and add on new RDs, add on new graduate students. And I mean, I love my job. I really enjoy it. I love going to work. I love working with these kids.
I know you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you well enough to know that, and I think that it's really important, right? Eh, Maybe there are some people out there who can do their job and not have that love and passion for it, but I think it is really important, especially when you're working with young people. You know this as well, if not better than I do, is like they could spot a phony
Oh,
a
yeah.
mile away, right? Like you can't imagine how many conversations I have with kids about their coaches and
Yeah.
how they sort of identify that this coach doesn't really give a shit, frankly, about me,
Yeah.
right? They know it, right? And so they know when you care and they know when you don't care, and that makes such a big difference. Does does it? I'm curious. Does it matter? Do you feel like it matters to the athletes that you work with that you were an athlete? Does that come up a lot? Like, is that a differentiator, or is it not a big deal?
Sometimes, like a lot of guys put value into it. Some guys don't. Some girls do. Some girls don't. It's really case dependent.
Hmm.
Uh, but sometimes, yeah, you have to kind of relate to them. Like you have to relate to that. Listen, I was in your position. I was doing what you were doing, and this worked for me. This didn't. And then I try to get across that just because I did something doesn't mean that you should do something. Just because that kid on your team does this every day does not mean it's the right procedure for you. And usually it could be a good conversation starter, but I try to pull back and separate everybody. I don't want to kind of bucket somebody in the
Yeah.
same, because like you said before, it's like they need to be seen and heard, and if every time I'm having a conversation, I'm like, this is what I did, they're not going to want to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yes. And that's actually a really good point you make. And I've seen that before firsthand where there are coaches who are really good coaches that care, but they talk a lot about themselves, right? This is
Yeah.
what I did. And the kids tune it out because they're when you're 16 or 17 or 15, developmentally, you're the center of the universe,
Yeah.
which is why they also have a hard
It's
time relating
a
to
good way to put
coaches.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, they have a hard time being
Yeah.
empathetic to coaches who have kids and jobs and families to feed and
Hmm.
decisions to make that are really hard. And all they can think about is, how does it affect me? Right. At the same time, if you're the coach telling you, hey, I did this and I did that, that's got nothing to do with me. So what do I care? So I think being self aware enough is really important. So I want to go back though to what you were saying before, because we didn't really like dive into it. And I kind of want to kind of take the conversation finish out this way
Okay.
is you talked about the school day. I thought it was a really important and smart point about we start with the school day because the structure is already built,
Yep.
right? We know when we're getting up, we know when we're going to be in school, we know when we're going to eat, and we work around that, right? Like it's already set up for us. But then kind of taking that next step forward and transferring it to a weekend or a game day or a tournament when that structure is different, right? Schedules change, fields change, weather changes, we have more discretion in how we use our time. How do you sort of work in that? Because like as we're going into baseball season, right? We're both baseball
Yeah.
guys. We're going to go into the summer and we have travel tournaments and all sorts of sports. How do you sort of take that like starting place with the school day structure and then start to adapt it to more uncertainty?
The first question I will ask, and it's usually to the parents, is when do the kids wake up? Because you start your day for school from 6:30 to 7:15 every day, right?
Mhm.
But most of these kids wake up at 10:30 on the weekends, right? Unless they're playing a game. And they've already missed breakfast. They've already missed their first snack of the day. Now they have to go through the normal routine. It's a little bit more of a time crunch. So usually the plan will shift. I like to kind of keep the structure of the plan. So a lot of the kids will start with, you know, we break our plates into levels. Depending on the level is how much kind of carb sources or protein sources you will have. Like level 3 is our high days, right? So most of the time the weekends are our high days. So a normal weekend could be like 3 level 3 plates. It could be 2 to 3 snacks. One may be a protein snack, one might be 2 carb snacks. And it's very similar to what the school day looks like, but now that the time blocks move back. And that usually means that some of those late meals could be happening really late at night, you know. And as the kids become more and more dialed in, is we get their sleep schedule to be a little bit more repeatable. You know, that 10:30 wake up, we try to push it to 9 o'clock. You know, we need to put more time back in the day, and that's usually kind of how we lead into it. I am a big proponent of our weekly meetings is ending the meeting by packing your bags, you know, your snack bags. You know, for school, we could pack your 5 snack bags, put in the fridge. You know, every day you grab it with your lunch and you're out the door. You know, on the weekends, it's a little bit more of we're going out tonight, we're going here or there. But I still try to get like 1 or 2 bags in the fridge, you know, to kind of give them some structure if all else fails, that they still have these few snacks. You know, and trust me when I say that the kids will take accountability of the weekends a lot quicker than we would think. You know, because they don't want to waste the 5 days of hard work and blow it on the weekends. You know, and I think it's funny because my adult population, it's a total other way around. You know, like they spent all week working so hard, and then the weekends they just
The cheat meal
yeah,
mentality.
yeah, you know, like that's kind of how it goes. But the kids are totally opposite, and they think it's more time to work, and you know, it's usually the time where they get to shine. You know, where they, and I mean, we didn't talk about it a lot, but like during our my process is like the kids have to start to cook. They have to go to the grocery store. You know, like they have
I
to,
love that. I think it's so critical. No, seriously,
yeah,
because
and like
they're seeing it from the ground up. They're not
yeah,
just it's not just being handed to them.
yeah, and that's when we kind of put those blocks in. You know, so like we'll make a game out of it. You know, we'll grade it. We'll like give them opinions on it. You know, sometimes we'll make their brothers and sisters eat it. You know, like we'll try to like make it a little bit like of a competition, like you said. Like all these kids that are coming to us are usually super competitive. You know, so gaming the system usually leads to better success.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, right? And that's frankly something I think about, something I struggle with in my work is like, how do I make it more fun? How do I make
Yeah,
it gamified? How do I make it so that they feel like it's more interactive and fun and
yeah.
like
It's not
versus
work.
feeling like a job,
Yeah,
like, oh, I got to go do this, right? But I think you're right about what you said initially, which was kids are really good about follow through once they know that it works and they know why they're doing it.
yep,
We don't give them enough credit for execution, right? We assume that they're not going to do it. I think they just need the system needs to be set up, the circumstances need to be set up, the roadmap needs to be set up. When you give them the roadmap and they understand why they're following the road, they're really good at follow
yeah,
through. Right. And I think we that's where one of those areas, to go back to the beginning of the conversation, like really being able to like I go through this a lot with the athletes that I work with when they hit a bump in the road and they struggle or something really goes bad. All they can think about is the bad thing. And I make sure that I say, hey, listen, let's think about where you started and where you got to. You need you deserve the credit for doing all the hard work and making all this progress. And one setback, while it feels really bad, is not an indication of how far you've come, and it's not the end point, right? It's the same with food, right? Like we might have a bad weekend, we might step in a ditch,
yeah,
but we can recover from that. Let's learn from that and let's either make an adjustment in the routine, or we don't need, like you said, we don't need to change the routine.
yeah,
We just can keep going and not focus on the fact that maybe we didn't do what we were supposed to do for one day, right?
yeah.
And not beating ourselves up with it and just saying, hey, okay, I learned from it. Let's make sure we don't do it again, or let's figure out how we change the system so we don't do it again. And I think that's really important, because once they feel like they're a failure, now it's like, well, I'm going to throw it all out the window, and we don't want to throw all that progress out the window.
I had a meeting right before we got on this. I have a Division 1 player. He is looks good for him to have a pro career, right? You know, we've been putting weight on him, putting strength on him, and we're probably like week 8 in, and he's been somebody that's 2 to 3 pounds every week religiously. You know, and he comes to me this week and he's like, head down, shoulders down. This is the kid that's usually telling me about every 12 things he did in the day. One of those kids you got to tell to slow down. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, my weight stayed the same. And I was like, and? Like, does it matter? And he was like, well, I mean, yeah. And I'm like, well, you had 2 exams this week. You traveled home to see your friends. I go, you came back, your team won XYZ. I was like, you really telling me you think you had a bad week? And he's like, no. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like he thought I was gonna come in there and kind of give him uh, the works on like what we didn't do. There's a lot of other pressures on your body: stress, sleep, recovery, success. And they do impact kind of your daily day and your values. So it was very funny. Such a high functioning player. That just looked like the world ended, and he had such a great week and had to spend basically the first 15 minutes like building him back up. And by the end of it, like then he's ready to run through a wall. Like I can guarantee you next week it's not going to be that number's going to move.
Yeah, there's a lot of important stuff in there, right? One is
Yeah.
you can only control so much. Sometimes your body doesn't cooperate. Sometimes circumstances dictate that you're not going to be able to replicate the ideal things that you need to do, right? Maybe there is an exam, maybe there's travel, maybe there's something going on and you can't sleep as much as you need to,
Yeah.
not because you're neglectful, it's because circumstances, there's reasons and there's excuses, which I tell athletes all the time. If there's a reason, like give that reason some credit. If it's an excuse that you could have done something different, right? But like what you're saying reminds me of working with 2 pitchers who train at RPP, right? Like, so we have sort of that common relationship, who came home in the winter after fall ball and their velocity was down at the same week. And I'm like, okay, oh my God, I'm at this and I should have been at that. And I'm like, well, okay, 1, you just got through the fall. 2, you're at the same time of the year. Like, hey, maybe there's something going on. Like, maybe it's just a bad day. Let's see where the velocity is the next time you throw.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the next time they went out and threw, the velocity was back up to a more acceptable, normal range in their mind. The lesson in that is sometimes we just have a bad day. Sometimes we just have a bad week and it bounces back just because, right? Versus if I have 2 bad days in a row or I have 2 weeks where I don't gain weight, now we might reassess the process and say, do we need to make an adjustment because it's now happened more than once versus it was just a bad day. I'm not going to beat myself up. I can accept it. Let's just keep doing what we're doing because we've been gaining 2 to 3 pounds every week for 7 weeks. Yeah. Now in week 8, we flatten out. It's like going to the gym. Sometimes you hit a plateau and you just got to work through it. It's not the end of the world as long as you're mindful of what you need to do to work through that plateau. Sometimes it's nothing different.
100%. I had this player. He's gonna know when I'm talking about him. But like, so
you're calling him out without saying.
Yeah, I'm calling him out because this kid is great. He's gonna do really great things, and he's been with me for, over a year and a half now. He's put on 50 plus pounds. He's got.
That's amazing.
Oh my! He is one of the hardest working kids I've ever worked with. He's hitting the ball, exit velo's up. He's a catcher. His velocity was the number that he didn't see tick up the way he wanted, right? Every day he'd come in and it was work. Whether we were training together or doing nutrition, it was work, and it wasn't the same fun or same hangout or same kind of vibes. And I remember grabbing him like right before he started the season. I said, call me when you smash a ball into the gap. I go, tell me how much fun you're having. And, like week 1 in, starts tearing the baseball. My arm feels good. I'm throwing harder. Everything's great. I can't believe how much the jump took. Like you said, it was 1 week, 1 instance where he wasn't himself and it was getting into his head. And I sometimes I just want to get in front of them and say, listen, you have 1 good day. I'd rather you ride the good day than the bad day. Let that good day drive into the next week, and every time you have that bad day, just remember this feeling of, hey, it takes 1 at bat. It takes 1 pitch. It takes 1 gun guy at second base, and then we're back on top of the world.
Yeah. Well, that's, in essence, you've described my work in a nutshell, right? Everything is our brains are geared toward to focus on the negative. We can do
Yeah.
all that great stuff, and we expect that we should be able to do it. And then as soon as there's one negative or subpar performance, we
Yeah.
put all the emphasis on that. Like, oh, something's wrong. What if I'm not good enough? What if whatever? And that takes us into the ditch, and we stay there. Versus like, hey, even if it was my fault that that one bad instance happened or that one bad at bat or game happened, it's not going to stay that way, right? Let's bounce back from it. Let's go back to what we're doing. We're here for a reason. It's really hard, but that's the way the human mind works. And so when you're coaching athletes, counseling them, whatever you
Yeah.
do, right? Like that ability to help them give themselves that grace and show them that, hey, there's so much good stuff that you're doing here, and focus on that as much as you can. Let's find a way to keep the focus on all that positive stuff you're doing versus that or there's that one bad day and it seems like the end of the world, and it's not. And as a former baseball player,
Yeah.
you probably were in that
I was that
situation
guy.
more than once in your
Yeah.
life.
Of course, and that's when you would lean on it a little bit. I think that's the moment where you kind of give
Yes.
your, hey, listen, like I understand. Like you've done everything we've asked of you. You've shown up. You've done the work. And then that value's still not there. Yeah, no, that could take a lot. You spent a lot of time working towards that goal. And not seeing it the first time is tough. You know, I would kind of throw this back to you and ask your opinion on, you know, once they accomplish a goal, and sometimes it is that 50 pound, 70-pound goal, getting a kid to that point and it's like, what's next? Switching the goal to something new, maybe it's body composition, total muscle mass, flexibility or
Mhm.
force production. That's usually when we go and graduate into that next level. But finding motivation for the secondary goal is usually a little bit harder. Like in your opinion, like I'd like to throw it back on you is like once goal A is accomplished, do you find it's a little bit challenging to get goal B?
Um, that's a good question. I think what's hard are time horizons, right? So what I mean
Okay.
by that is short term versus long term.
Yeah.
Meaning, if it took me 3 months to achieve goal A, there's probably a little bit of fatigue because I know how much
Yeah.
hard work is going to go into starting it over, and it's easier to sort of take your foot off the pedal. It's also hard to connect goal B to the long term, right?
Yeah.
Meaning like, okay, I want to play in college, but I put on 30 pounds as a junior in high school, but I'm still not there yet. Like I've got to go through another 3 months of going through this every single day for a result that I don't know that I'm going to get. So I guess the way I'm going to ultimately answer this question, which is probably one of the hardest things that I have to do as a mental performance coach with young people, is helping them to clarify their values, right? What is important to them?
Yeah.
Meaning, like, not the outcome, right? Not the performance, but the who am I, right? Like, why do I want to increase my force production?
Yeah.
Why do I want to change my body composition? What's important to me, right? Because if I know what's important to me as a human being and force production out of the ground aligns with who I want to be, no, I'm
Uh-huh.
serious, right?
Yeah.
Or
No.
body composition, right? Like
Yeah.
if how I look to the world is really important to me, I'm much more likely to do the things that are necessary to change my body
Okay.
composition because putting on weight requires you to eat, which listen, that could be a chore in and of itself, right? Practically. But having to eat is probably more fun than having to sort of measure your food or measure the
Yeah.
number of macros or cutting out carbs so that you look a certain way, right? I'm just using very general,
Yeah. Yeah.
uneducated examples, right? So like that next goal might be harder, right? Like the goal A might be the low hanging fruit goal. Goal B is the one that could actually be harder to achieve, require more effort and sacrifice. And C, it might be, harder to connect it to like, why am I doing this? Like if I put on 30 pounds, like I know the answer, like hit the ball
Yeah.
harder now. But how do I know that that 30 pounds is going to lead me to the next
success.
level. I don't,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, I think it's helping them understand why they're doing it, who they are. And then like maybe also for me with goals, if someone tells me they want to be a professional baseball player, it's like, let's work backwards, right? Like what's the next step? The next step might be what you're saying is like, hey, if you want to get here, the next step on that is doing goal B.
Yep.
Okay, let's go do goal B because it's going to be a step in the staircase up to the long-term
Top.
goal, right? So like there's a lot of ways to skin that cat, but it is hard because I think if you're a kid who's worked for 3 months or 6 months to put on a lot of weight and you've sacrificed a lot of things and you've adopted a new process and you've been successful, you also natural instinct, I think, is to give yourself a break and be like, okay, now I just want
Right.
to go back and like take some of the fatigue out of the system mentally and emotionally. I'm just going to go back to being normal because I've earned it, right? I've earned that right for a cheat meal.
Yeah.
I've earned that right to go eat what I want because I put on 30 pounds. Like I did all the hard work. And that's to keep them sort of on that path upward it is a big challenge. And I find myself being the one to catch them in the net of being like, okay, you're going forward, but like don't if you take a step back, that's okay, but don't let yourself fall back to where you started
Right.
because now it's just easier to do that. So it's a challenge, right? And I always sort of look at it through the lens of motivation, right? As I think I said, autonomy, right? Autonomy, competence, relatedness, self-determination theory, right? Like, do I feel like I'm in control? Do I feel like I am getting better or I feel like I'm good at this thing that I'm doing? And who am I doing it with? Like relatedness, who am I connected to in the process, coaches and teammates and things like that. If we can check those three things, you usually get a kid to be motivated
Oh,
to achieve that next goal or
yeah.
to go after it. Um, all right. So like as we're sort of wrapping up here, I was thinking about sort of the last question. So I'm gonna ask you two more questions.
Dude.
One is if somebody is thinking about engaging with Nick,
Yeah.
dietitian, but they're on the fence or they don't understand it, like what's the one thing you'd want them to know about the process that could help them make a decision to sort of get involved in the process?
The biggest thing is we offer everyone kind of that initial phone call. Like test the waters. It's a free phone call. Usually lasts about 15 minutes. We really just talk about goals, aspirations, and like what the process truly entails. We covered a lot of it today, but there's obviously some other stuff I kind of like to put into vision. It's not for everybody, and if we have highly motivated kids, highly motivated families, we have a lot of success. Like I said earlier, like we pick and choose on who we work with, and it's a decision for us. We need to know the kind of person, the kind of family that we're bringing into our network, and like we take a lot of pride in building a really good community of kids who talk to each other, who work together, who bounce ideas off of each other. We build it in a system that these kids might be through our program for a year or 2 years, or 12 weeks, but they could still go back and lean on me, the other dietitians, the other kids in the program. We have a really good network and a good app of infrastructure. You know, what I could tell a parent that who's thinking about it, you know, we a lot of the parents put value into the coaches, the hitting coach, the pitching coach.
Mhm.
You know, you're eating a lot more than you're playing baseball. Your body is something that is going to be with you long after you hang up the cleats. The process and the stuff that we're teaching here is not just baseball oriented, it's not just sport oriented. It's health oriented. We're giving your children the equipment to run for the rest of their lives. And I want to put that into the presence of, you know, it's not just for sport.
Yeah. So I'm going to use an analogy because I think it's a perfect segue into like one of the things that I usually say to parents who are interested in my process working
Yeah.
with me for their kid. I'd say like mental performance coaching for athletes is like putting vegetables in a smoothie, right? When your kid's a little, you put the vegetables in the
Yeah.
smoothie and they don't realize it's there. They're coming to the process of talking to somebody about the mental side of their
Yeah.
sport through the lens of sport because that's what matters. But it's not oh, I'm going to see a counselor or a therapist, which a
Yeah.
lot of times they reject, right? So it's the same idea of like, hey, there's a bigger impact here. There's a longer term impact in terms of these skills. Yes, they're going to apply it through the lens of their sport, through performance, but ultimately it's going to stick with them a lot longer. So I think that is also, that's a really important point.
Yeah.
So last question is, if you're an athlete listening to this, if you were talking to an athlete, a high school athlete, like what's one piece of advice from your advice, from your perspective as a dietitian, that you'd leave with them that you think that they could take and apply?
You shouldn't look up your junior year and say, how could I change my body? Like you should be thinking about this middle school, early in high school. To do this the right way, it takes a lot of time. Don't waste it. There's opportunity, there's education all over the place. Like I said before, what we're teaching isn't rocket science, and it's not something you have to unlock or buy. You can look up on our Instagram pages, our YouTubes, our Twitters. You want some good goals to start with, go watch some of it. I would love to work with every single kid in the whole wide world. It's not possible. You know what I mean? Like it's not.
Yeah.
And it's something that you can fully educate yourself on pretty quickly and start seeing the fruitfulness just as quick. Don't wait.
Perfect. All right. Nick, man, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's always great to talk to you. We actually did it with the record button this time.
Yeah. We crushed it.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.